On this show, we'll dive into the complex realities of harm reduction, substance use disorder, homelessness, and related topics.
We want to emphasize that while we have extensive frontline experience in these areas, we are not accredited professionals. Therefore, despite thorough research, factual inaccuracies may occur from time to time.
We are passionate advocates who prioritize lived experiences and compassion in all discussions. Our conversations may contain explicit language and address topics that can be upsetting to some listeners.
We encourage everyone to engage with an open mind and understand that our goal is to foster understanding, empathy, and support for those impacted by these issues. Hi everyone, welcome back to A Dose of Reality. I'm Cassandra.
I'm Tanya.
Have you been, Tanya?
Well, Cassandra, it's funny you should ask. I actually...
Is it?
Sounds like I have a great story, and I don't.
It sounds like, oh, you know what? Now that you bring it up.
Well, I mean, the week was full of Tanya-isms, like the burn on my wrist. That would be from baked potatoes. I could go on with some of those blunders. I have plenty of them. I started biking again this week.
Do you know what?
Almost dumped it twice, yes.
Was it this weekend? Last weekend, John Luke and I went biking.
Did you?
And it was the first time I've been on a bike since I was like 12, 13.
So you understand what I mean by almost dumping the bike.
Yeah. We went like probably about a 2-hour bike ride.
Oh, it's amazing.
I literally came back and like it felt so good, but I came back and just collapsed on the floor.
Did you find new muscles you forgot you had?
I forgot. Yes, I did. I did. And I was reminded how small the bike seats are.
At least for about 3 to 4 days, sitting takes on a new meaning. It does.
It does. It really does. No, but it was great.
I don't know what it's like for a guy. I mean, I realize the apparatus situation is different, but it can't be any more pleasant.
No, I can't imagine.
No, because that would be another pain of the week is my ass. From biking, yes, from biking, and yeah,
I didn't know where you're going with that.
No, I was just watching you like kind of sweat it out a bit. It was more fun. So, Cassandra, seeing as how my week was fun, exactly how did your week go besides biking?
It went good. Yeah. I'm trying to think now what I did work-wise, but I
right? You asked.
Just a blank. I'm like, let me pull up my calendar and see what I did this week.
It went so fast.
Because I don't. Yeah, it really did. It went like.
You really don't know what you did.
I really don't know what I did. So it must have been an okay week.
Well, no news is good news, I've learned in my ripe old age.
Wow, this check-in's been like wild. We've clearly been up to a lot.
I mean, it was exciting to know that I can't bake potatoes. I wish I could show you all my burn. It's pretty nasty.
We're having a barbecue this week for the clients.
Yeah. We sure are. On Friday, 12 to 2.
I mean, this episode's going to come out like well after. Stop by.
Maybe we shouldn't mention the barbecue. But
we are planning a barbecue for this week. And by this week, we mean the week of recording the episode, not the week the podcast is going up.
This is correct.
So
definitely will not be happening.
But we are planning it in celebration. This is wild. This whole story is crazy because this podcast is coming out in the future. And we're currently, present day, going to have a barbecue for the clients for your birthday, which happened months ago.
Well, a month and a half.
A month and a half ago.
April.
So this is just,
But my friends are going to barbecue, so everybody has full bellies. It's a group of 7 of us. And barbecuing in April was a little too crispy.
This episode's going up in the future.
Oh, that's right. So one of the girls talked about trying to make up treat bags, but she didn't want to say
candy?
For sure. All
oh
the
my
sugar.
God.
She loves buying sugar for our folks, so because they enjoy
They love
it.
sugar, yeah.
It's very helpful when in addictions. So there's going to be popcorn, cake, hot dogs, hamburgers, and possibly... Did I say popcorn?
I don't remember.
Oh, boy. Sometimes doing this at the end of the day, you're like, maybe I'm not as sharp as I once was. So, that concludes my thoughts. Where are your thoughts going?
I'm just really excited for something.
Oh, it's the daily dose. It's a dose of reality. What the hell is it? A dose, or it's a daily dose.
So I have a daily dose. For those of you who don't know, the Daily Dose is a segment of our show where we go online and we either find a fun fact, harm reduction related, or substance use or mental health related, or a news article or something relevant in the current time of filming the podcast, and we bring it up. So my Daily Dose. Is that a drum roll?
Well,
I love it. Okay. I have an article. I'm going to read some snippets of it.
What year was this article written in?
This year.
Oh,
it was a couple days ago, 4 days ago. So at 26, Jillian is a published author. She's a community educator and a youth group leader for the Red Deer branch of the Schizophrenia Society of Alberta. She manages social media and recruitment for the Red Deer Royals marching band. And most recently, she has taken a job wrapping and packaging caramels for a small home-based business.
Oh, wow.
She's a busy lady.
Yeah, she certainly is.
She's a very busy lady. Published author with 3 part-time jobs.
Oh, my gosh.
It says in the article, quote, "If you have never met a person who lives with schizophrenia, you just did." So, Jillian is among more than 147,500 Canadians who deal with schizophrenia, a severe mental illness. So I figured, because our segment today, which we didn't mention, but our segment today is going to be about mental health and trauma. So last Friday of recording this podcast, so that would have been May 24th,
right,
was World Schizophrenia Day. So this is from the Mental Health Commission. And they posted this article about Jillian, who is someone who lives with schizophrenia.
Oh, what? Wow.
Right? So it goes on to say, "I thought I saw dead people," she says. "I found it very hard to pay attention in school, and socially I was not really fitting in with the other kids because of my odd behavior and the things I would talk about. That's when I started hallucinating. I was very much in my own world at that point." So throughout all of school, from what I gather, I'll link the article, but she was medicated, then unmedicated, just finding it difficult to stay on medication throughout all her school and her schooling and university. And I believe the article said she had to drop out of college because of it, because she wasn't keeping up with her meds and the therapy and everything, and just struggled very hard, because it is a very hard illness to live with. Yes. And to find the right medication that works for you and your body, on top of if you had to take any other medication and things like that. So, but for the past 4 years, she has been receiving medication and therapy. She says the hallucinations and delusions are still something she experiences, but to a much lesser extent than what I used to, she says. Several factors impact whether or not I recognize them. Medication is definitely a big part, but she also credits life experience. So she has learned to gauge the reactions of others around her.
Okay.
So if she's with someone, she says, if I'm with someone I trust, I ask them what they're experiencing in that moment. If I'm out in public and experiencing hallucination and no one else is around me, sometimes, or around me seems to notice or react, that's a good indicator for me that it's a hallucination. She has schizophrenia. She's medicated. She's taking the right steps. And she has that support. And now she's a published author with 3 part-time jobs. That's
a huge
I think I liked it because, one, it tied into our topic this week. And yeah, last week being World Schizophrenia Day.
Yeah.
And then it also shows, just because someone has this diagnosis doesn't mean that they can't operate in society. And a lot of the individuals that we see here at Ensemble who use substances and are homeless are some people who who have schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Right. So I remember also, I found this, I think it was on TikTok. I found this person and he had trained his dog to help him, if he was having a psychosis? If he was in psychosis, or he was seeing
ghost hallucination.
Okay. Sorry, I'm blanking on that word. If he was having a hallucination, he had trained his dog. So if he would tell his dog go greet, and if the dog didn't go greet, then he was like, oh, that person's not really there.
That's genius,
right? And then he was also saying, he was giving helpful tips.
Yeah.
On to other people who also might be struggling. And he was like, if I'm in public, say on a bus, I'll take out my phone and like hold up the camera. If it's not showing on the camera, then I know it. So it's developing those coping mechanisms on how to cope and deal with the everyday struggles of living with this
and still be
disorder and still be in society, right? Yeah. So medication's a big part of it, and so is therapy, but also then developing those own coping mechanisms, whether that's, you know, gauging the reactions of people around you, like Jillian does, or it's like having a trained dog or using your phone, the camera on your phone, and like these things. So
that is clever though with the dog, because you see,
right?
I mean, I was like, that's great.
Yeah,
like you're using what tools you have in your toolkit.
Yeah,
even if you don't even know they're in the bag. So that's even cooler.
Yeah,
and it is so important for people to know that it can be a successful life.
Yeah,
dealing with mental illness.
Yeah, because it's just like any it's a. I mean, it's a bit more extreme than anxiety and depression and stuff, but it still affects your life, right? And people can still function with those things. You can still function even though you have a mental illness.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Cassandra, what did you, okay, so first of all, our topics are trauma, addiction, ACEs, and mental illness. So we deal with these 4 items every single day.
They're all interconnected.
You
can't have one, and you can't really talk about one without talking about the other.
But most of our folks, I mean, obviously, our folks have addictions. There's some with mental illness. Yeah. I would say, not just even putting it into just our arena, I would say everybody deals with somebody every day that has trauma. Or even ACEs, which we're going to explain. These are all very common things, not just for us here.
That's actually a fact. Every 1 in 5 people have some form of mental illness in Canada. So either you yourself have it, or you definitely know someone who struggles with mental illness.
And it's good that there's more awareness coming out about it, because I don't think mental health is just like physical health. And I don't think people always realize that you need exercise for the brain as much as you need it for the body too. So I think I don't know. I think we're not going to go crazy and give like clinical definitions and anything like that.
Oh God, no.
Everybody has a slight idea, just a couple formal wordings per se. But it's so good that we're talking about it, because this is something I really think everybody deals with all these things every day.
Oh, for sure. And I think in order for us to go forward with the podcast and in order for us to start, you know, going in the directions we have mapped out for the podcast to go, we need to understand like the reason people use substances in the first place is because of trauma, which is because of mental illness typically, right? Well, it's all connected. You cannot have, not a single person who starts using substances has not experienced some form of trauma in their life.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just wrapped right around.
It is. So I'm going to start off very briefly talking about what is mental health before getting into what is mental illness, because they're 2 different things.
Beautiful.
And I find myself too, before I actually looked into it, some like they're just used interchangeably. Yeah. Like people don't really know there is a difference between mental health and mental illness. And
well, we're just learning so much more.
Asleep.
Your puppy's. Oh, Paisley's here. She's our first guest. I was going to say speaker, but she's out cold.
She's out cold. My dog's in her bed by our feet right now, and she is. You guys can't see this, but she's very much out cold.
Well, I did pump her full of treats.
Tanya bribed her love. So what is mental health? Yeah. So mental health refers to a person's overall psychological well-being, which basically encompasses everyone's emotional, psychological, and social aspects of your life. Every single person has mental health.
Absolutely.
Quote unquote good mental health. It allows an individual to cope with stress, realize their potential. They can have good work productivity, and they're able to contribute to community. And this involves when we talk about mental health, we're talking about factors like how we think, how we feel, how we act, how we handle stress, how we relate to others, our decision making. All of those things is what we talk about when we're referring to mental health. So when we're saying we have good mental health, we're saying we're thinking okay, we're feeling okay, we're acting okay, we're handling stress, right? And mental health can also be influenced by a variety of factors, biological factors, so your genetics.
Okay.
Epigenetics is a big study right now within psychology.
Okay.
So it's especially intergenerational epigenetics.
That is so interesting.
Right? So it's basically the study of how our genes are affected over generations of time and how that contributes to our mental well-being.
Right.
And right. So basically, if you think like, take the redhead gene, for example. So having red hair, take that gene. Sometimes it gets passed down and people say it skips a few generations. So like my great-great-grandmother, say, had red hair. And then my grandmother didn't, then my mom didn't, but I did. So it's kind of the same thing they're finding out with like mental health and especially trauma. That's is incredible. Like your great-great-grandmother might have had a certain trauma response, which then got passed on through genes until it reached you, but it might not have been unlocked in your mother or your grandmother because they didn't go through a traumatic experience that would have caused it to be unlocked, but it's in your genetic makeup.
That's mind-blowing.
Right?
I love the science.
So now we're in, like, before biology was separate from psychology, which was separate from, you know what I mean? Like, it was all separate, but now they're really starting to look at how your biological factors influence your experiences and your psychological factors, which is also influenced by your environmental stressors. So how all these three, like the biopsychosocial, basically, it's the biopsychosocial model. So how all these three factors come together and influence you as a person.
I just can't imagine denying that.
Right? It makes sense, right? It
really does.
Right? So that's what mental health is taking into consideration all of these factors to make up your mental well-being. So like you said earlier, it is essential to prioritize your mental health, like your physical health, because it impacts your quality of life. If you're not taking care of your mental health, it's going to impact your quality of life in a negative way. Same thing if you're not taking care of your physical health, it's going to impact your quality of life in a negative way.
I find too, I find physical health, you notice it more, but mental health, it's very sneaky. So once your mental health declines, all of a sudden you're like, oh, where did I just end up? So it's good to...
It's like a slow decline.
Yeah.
Right.
And before you realize it, you're on that slope before you bring yourself back up. So I find it's very sneaky.
Now, what is mental illness? Yeah. So mental illness, it has to be a diagnosis. Okay. So you have to meet a certain number of criterias.
Out of the DSM-5?
That's a question I do not know.
Okay,
probably.
My apologies.
But there probably is, there's a criteria that doctors have that you have to meet to get that diagnosis.
Okay.
Like you can't a doctor won't go in, if you go in to see a doctor or a psychiatrist or what have you, and you say, I've just been feeling very anxious lately. They're not going to diagnose you with generalized anxiety disorder.
No.
You have to meet certain criteria.
Okay.
So mental illness refers to a wide range of conditions that affect one's mood, thinking, and behavior. So these conditions can significantly impact a person's ability to function daily in life. So everyone has mental health. And if you have a mental illness, that means that's impacting on your mental health. Mental illness can affect people of all ages, backgrounds, cultures, anyone. It does not discriminate. You said the same thing.
I tell you.
It doesn't discriminate.
Too bad it wouldn't, eh?
I bought a shirt last night. I bought a shirt online that says substance use disorder does not discriminate, people do.
Oh.
And I'm so excited to get it.
That is really good.
I can't wait to wear it. I'm so excited. So mental illness can manifest in different ways. So you have your anxiety disorders. This includes generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorders, phobias, obsessive compulsion disorder. And this usually the category, it's categorized usually it's characterized, as like worry or fear or nervousness. Then you have your mood disorders. So this would include depression or bipolar disorder.
Okay.
And this is when there's disturbances in your mood. So like with depression, you have a persistent sadness. Mm-hmm. And then with bipolar disorder, you have, alternating periods of depression and mania. So
manic and
yeah,
mania,
right.
yeah.
So you have those, it's alternating between those two. So that would be the bipolar disorder. Then you also have psychotic disorders. So this would be schizophrenia.
Okay.
Which involves disruptions in thinking, perception, and behavior. So this, again, you can experience hallucinations, delusions, and you have difficulty distinguishing between reality and like what is real, what is not real.
Right.
So the common theme here is there some factor of your mental health is disturbed.
Okay.
So that's kind of where a mental illness, it's you know, your mood is disturbed, your thinking has been disturbed, like something has been disrupted. Sorry, not disturbed, disrupted. Sorry.
No, I understand.
But you know what I mean. So then you also have your eating disorders.
Yes.
So you have it is a big one that's not talked about a lot because this could be a whole other episode topic, but we live in a society where right now thinness is praised, slenderness is praised. So people don't put a lot of attention on eating disorders, I think.
That's interesting.
It's a dangerous loop to get into because you could have someone who has an eating disorder and then you go up to someone, you say, oh my goodness, you've lost weight. Like that you look great. Mm-hmm. But you're feeding that person's eating disorder. Like it's hard.
Yeah. In high school, I had 3 friends that had eating disorders, and it was tough.
It's
And,
hard.
It's very hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then you have your substance use disorder. So this involves excessive use of alcohol or substances or what have you, despite their negative consequences, which can lead to physical and psychological dependencies. But I put out there, like, I like that when I looked it up and I got this resource, and I'll include it. It included substance use disorder with anxiety and mood, and because that's what substance use disorder is. Mm-hmm. It's a coping mechanism for mental illness.
And on that note, I've heard from a couple different folks saying that using helps to slow down the voices.
Yeah.
So it's not a good thing to use if you know.
No, that's the idea of self-medicating.
Exactly.
Right. That's where that comes in. So it's important to recognize that mental illnesses, they are a medical condition. So your anxiety disorders, your mood disorders, your eating disorders, psychiatric disorders, and your substance use disorder. It's a disorder. These are medical conditions, and you need professional help with them. Just like if you had a physical illness, right?
Absolutely.
So it's also a spectrum. So you can move up and down. No one fits in any category like this or that.
Right.
Like there's nothing you can talk about where you're like, do you fit in this category or that category? Like the world's not black and white like that.
No.
Everything is a spectrum. Like substance use itself is on a spectrum. Mental health is on a spectrum. Mental illness is on a spectrum. Like this is all, you can move up and down. It's very fluid. Like one day you can be like, and you can also have both these things. Like you can have like the early signs of a mood disorder, but have been diagnosed with anxiety for like many years now.
Yeah, I
right?
can see the correlation.
Like it's just all a spectrum that moves up and down, and it's not as easy as being like, well, I don't have mental illness. Well, I do have mental illness. Like at some point, I feel like everyone struggles with something that is related to a mental illness.
I would definitely say.
Yeah. Whether it is like schizophrenia, which is a lifelong condition you have to deal with and learn how to cope with, or it is like your friends in high school who I don't know who they are, but in high school they had an eating disorder. Yeah. They probably, I don't know, but you can have an eating disorder in high school and learn how to cope with it. Now you don't have it anymore.
Coping skills.
Or you have the coping, I'm sorry, it is still a lifelong thing, but you have the coping skills to handle it.
Yeah.
Right? So,
and you say things moving on the spectrum.
Yeah.
I know you haven't gotten into your second topic yet, and I still have 2 to briefly unpack, but just a common theme as we start talking about these 4 things is everything is so interlinked. Everything starts to overlap on the other one. You're saying about being on the spectrum too, like if you have poor mental health, well, maybe you'll go through a stretch where you're good mental health, and then
Yeah.
it could go down, it could go up. There
Yeah.
could be so many different factors
Yeah.
that can contribute to this. Yeah. And all these 4 topics, they're,
Well, because one of those factors that can contribute to that is trauma,
yeah.
right? So that's where the trauma comes in, is traumatic experiences. So your violence, abuse, natural disasters. If you've lived
Yeah.
through a natural disaster, traumatic event, neglect,
Yeah.
emotional neglect, any form of neglect,
Losing a parent.
losing a parent, grief. Grief
Yeah.
is a big one. These can profoundly affect mental health, right? So, which then potentially leads to mental illness and to the conditions like you have your PTSD, so post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety disorder, substance use disorders, right? So if you go through a traumatic event like that, you lose someone close to you, or you live through something that's, you live through a violent situation or a natural disaster, you are then in the likelihood of developing a substance use disorder, an anxiety disorder, depression, and whatever mental illness, right? So,
Yeah. To add in on that note too, it's kind of like, how do I get that out? Like everything compounds. You have 2 people that go through 2 or 3 of the same situations, depending upon their upbringing. Depends probably more so on how they're going to cope with these traumatic experiences.
trauma
as
is
well.
definitely subjective.
Subjective,
Yeah.
yeah. But there's going to be a theme. Everything is so subjective because
Yeah.
there's so many moving parts to this segment.
Yeah, that's why we couldn't talk about mental health without talking about trauma, without talking about ACEs, without talking about addiction. Like it all interplays with each other in one way or another.
Absolutely.
And it's all related, and it's way more complex. This is why I say, we've all seen the debate before: is substance use a choice or is it a disease? And basically, if I'm with people and they're saying, well, it's a choice, then I say, okay, if you genuinely believe it's a choice, just understand that it's a choice that so many factors played into. It's not a choice in the sense like waking up and deciding what to wear that day, or waking up and deciding, you know what, I'm going to dye my hair today, or what have you. It's a choice that had so many factors behind it, from literally talking about intergenerational epigenetics, from literally when you were in the womb.
Yeah.
Trauma disrupts a person's sense of safety and trust and security.
Wow, that's a big
Isn't
sentence.
that impactful?
It's very impactful.
Yeah. So, and these are essential components to making up your mental health. Like if you don't have a sense of safety, you don't have a sense of security, then your well-being's jeopardized, which means you're then at risk for a mental illness. So it's all connected.
It really,
it's
really
all connected.
is.
So this then starts affecting, your relationships, your own self-esteem, your ability to cope with stress effectively, which is very important, because when you don't have the ability to cope with stress, you're going to turn to anything. You're going to turn to a lot of the reason. A big reason, I would say, a lot of people start using substances is because they don't have the ability to cope with stress effectively.
Absolutely. They may not have people to talk to,
No.
no supportive family, let alone sibling or best friends, very isolated. And depending upon what traumatic event folks have gone through, that can isolate you even more to try to stay away.
Yeah.
So it compounds again.
So basically, trauma is a significant risk factor for the development of various mental illnesses. And an example that I found of this is childhood trauma, which I'm going to skip over because you're going to talk about that.
Oh, that's okay.
But I didn't write the example down. I just wrote down childhood trauma in brackets.
Oh.
Tanya will talk about this. but childhood trauma is very significant to developing mental illnesses.
Which
it plays a
makes
big
sense,
factor into it, right? So, and not just when we say trauma too, we have to remember, going back to neglect, that trauma isn't always what happens to an individual, but a lot of the times it's also what doesn't happen.
Yeah, but you don't see.
Then that's where the emotional neglect comes in, right? So I use the example sometimes of if you could have mom, dad, and son, who are mom and dad are, I don't know, they're like rocket scientists or something, like very well off family.
Right.
And the child never had to want for anything. He always got everything he asked for. He never had to struggle or had any hardships. But mom and dad were always working and just kind of like bought his love, basically.
Yeah.
Well, then you're missing a very key component in your upbringing.
Yeah.
Right.
Parents are both forced to work.
Yeah.
Because sometimes there's no choice in the family.
Well, and that's
The money,
another
too.
thing, right? If you have single mom who needs to work 2 or 3 jobs to keep a roof over child's head, then also unintentionally. But that's where it comes into like, do you have the other supports you need?
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
And this none of this is saying that if you've lived through any of this, then you're going to develop trauma, then you're going to develop substance use disorder. But it's more so to think of it the other way, that every single person who has substance use disorder, who use substances to cope with these things, they have gone through something traumatic to be there. And trauma, I'm not a scientist, but it does alter your brain development. Like it affects, when you go through something traumatic, it affects the stress response system, and it contributes to the development of maladapted coping strategies. So it changes the function and the structure of your brain. Like it affects the like neurotransmitters in your brain. It affects how you retain information. It affects the release of dopamine. It affects the stress response systems in your brain, which then again it makes you vulnerable to mental illness.
Yeah.
To contracting a mental illness. So some individuals may experience multiple or prolonged traumatic events. So this was known as complex trauma. So these are particularly severe. So an example of complex trauma would be like veterans.
Okay.
Right? Like they've, for many years, have probably gone through prolonged traumatic events.
Yeah.
Fighting overseas. So this is particularly severe and has enduring effects on mental health. And then often resulting in complex post-traumatic stress disorder, other severe mental health conditions. Complex trauma can impact various areas of functioning, so including emotional regulation, so how you regulate your emotions, your interpersonal relationships, and your just like self-identity, your idea of who you are. Right. If we do take veterans for an example, because some of our clients and some of the people who we help who access the services are veterans. Yeah. Right. You go over and you start fighting in a war and you're there for many years and you come home injured and you're just like, I don't know what to do. Like, who am I basically now? Like you have to reinvent your whole self. Like that's rough.
A lot of these topics too talk about identities, losing identities, not know what, because you do have something huge happen in your life and you're like, whoa, okay.
Who am I now?
It's a setback almost. Not, no.
So understanding the impact of trauma on mental health is crucial for providing effective care and support, obviously. You need to understand that. You need to understand how trauma affects mental health in order to handle it.
Absolutely.
And to order how to provide adaptive, what's the word I'm looking for? Appropriate care, I guess. So this is why adopting trauma-informed approaches are necessary. And they're important. Yeah.
It's starting to grow in the community.
It is. I've noticed that. And I guess we will do a whole episode at some point coming up about trauma-informed care and what exactly that is. But it's just understanding that people can live through very traumatic things and rough events, and it's just treating people with compassion when they're having a rough time, basically.
I think you could almost, if you were just going to give a fluffy term for trauma-informed care, is just be kind.
It is. I mean, everything. Harm reduction, just be kind. Well, trauma-informed care, just be kind.
Well, I'm serious. It's
it like really is.
Our society, our people, us, we've all, everybody has something. And if we could just learn how to be kind. And that's what trauma-informed care is. It's seeing an individual and knowing their worth and knowing that they've gone through these crazy things and still working towards the future. Like, people need I'm going to stop right there.
So before Tanya takes it over, I just want to quickly bring it back to, we talked about trauma, we talked about one's mental illness, but trauma and mental illness can significantly heighten the risk of developing substance use disorder. We already talked about it. We already talked about how individuals who use substances, they all have trauma. There's no doubt about that. They all have something trauma. Now, what that traumatic thing might be is like up for debate. Some of it, again, it's subjective, right?
Oh, yeah.
So I'm staring at, you guys can't see it, but I'm staring at one of my slideshows, one of my slides.
What do I have?
No, I'm looking at my screen. You don't have anything.
Where's the spider?
No, there's no spider.
Just point it out. I don't have time. So
I'm looking at one of my slides that shows a graph of how trauma, mental illness, and substance use are all intertwined. So basically, if you look at mental health and substance use disorder, many individuals with mental health disorders, they may turn to substances as a way to self-medicate, like we talked about, which helps alleviate some of their symptoms. So using substances to quiet the voices in their head.
Oh, I've heard it a couple times.
If you look at trauma and substance use, so trauma, which is experience that are emotionally and psychologically distressing, again, when you go through traumatic experience, it heightens or makes you more prone to developing a mental illness, which then puts you at risk for self-medicating, or you may start self-medicating because of it.
And when you say self-medicating, let's unpack that a hair. Wow, such support. Self-medicating can be people that go shopping. They're choosing to do something and medicating. Mm-hmm. Okay, sorry, I thought you were like, you're wrong. And I'm like,
no, you're right.
Not wrong. No. Like, it's just the same people that binge watch, or there's so many different things that people do.
You're feeling sad, so you go home and you buy some things off Amazon.
And then eat it with ice cream. I mean,
things you bought
shop
off
with
Amazon.
ice cream, sorry. Yes, I can only be expected to have so much intelligence at this time of day. Having had said that, but that's something important to unpack. It could be so many different things. Some people choose to read a book. Some people may choose to use a substance.
I had a really stressful day. I'm going to crack open my beer now.
Well,
smoke my joints so I can veg out on the couch.
And so everybody picks their poison, if you will. But I guess I reiterate it just to show that we don't always have to stigmatize the people that do things that don't match up with what we think is correct.
No.
So, and we as in you and me, or we as in our families, however
even
you look at things.
Even when I go out and I do presentations and I do say that like you can be addicted to anything, addiction is anything. I have like 2 slides where I just show things you can be addicted to that are legal or socially acceptable. And you have the typical ones like caffeine and alcohol and tobacco and things like that. And like people, when you explain like these can be harmful in the long run, people are like, oh yeah, anything's harmful in the long run. Like you consume tons of caffeine in the long run. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. But when you see like exercise or work, people are like, well, how is that harmful in the long run? It's exercise, you're exercising. But those things may not have immediate physical or like immediate health risks for you, but what's it doing to your financial, like what's it doing to you financially? What's it doing to your relationships? What's it doing to, you know what I mean?
I do.
Like,
I do.
If you're working all the time, that's great. For one, you're probably at risk of like burnout.
Yeah.
Right?
But that's what you've chosen to stuff
to
down
deal.
your
Yeah.
emotions,
Because you don't want to deal with whatever, like you're suppressing at some emotion or something that's happening. And then also if you're working all the time, how are you hanging out with friends? How is your wife? How is your partner? How's your children? Like it's affecting you negatively in some other way.
Which is what alcohol or substances do when you use it. And if it goes to a negative way, that's when you start getting into the abuse and disorder per se. It's just years ago when my anxiety was through the roof, I would make myself exercise 45 minutes a day. If I fell asleep on the couch and woke up at 2 a.m., I got up and exercised 45 minutes before I went back to bed. It was a must in my life. It was not healthy.
No.
So that's why I like that you brought that up, because there's different things that can still be detrimental. It doesn't always have to be a substance.
No. So, and I know last episode we went on the rant at the start about gambling and how, right? And it's a serious addiction because, you know, people have lost their home. Like, people who work their whole lives for their savings and their house and their family, they lose it all.
Yeah.
In one game because they can't stop gambling it all away, right?
Yeah.
So another point that I'm going to make before, Tanya, you take over, is that you can have pre-existing mental health disorders. So again, talking about genetics. If you live through a traumatic experience, that may trigger that mental health disorder, right?
Right.
So it's all trigger, or you can go through a mental health, like you can have a mental health experience, then go through something traumatic, or you could go through something traumatic and then develop a mental health disorder.
Yeah.
Like, it's all, the whole point of this, if you haven't gathered, is it's all connected. So
Deeply connected. Yeah.
it is very deeply connected. So, do you want to touch a bit about, that's all I had. That's really all I had.
Awesome.
It was all over the place, but do you want to talk a bit about ACEs and what is an addiction?
Yeah, absolutely. So what have you heard is an addiction? What and I do this not to put Cassandra on the hot seat, but just the idea of debunking some ideas like okay, well, here, I'll just give you the definition that I came across.
Can I tell you one thing
Of
before you
course.
start? When I think, this isn't what I think because I work here.
Right. Fair enough.
But when I think when the general public hears the term addiction, they automatically think substances of some, like they automatically think hard drugs. They automatically think alcohol. They automatically think.
I don't even find people think of alcohol as much anymore. I find it's
not
always
as much
substances.
because it is more socially acceptable to drink alcohol. That's why. But I think, yeah, you're right. I think
but
people,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, and I think you're right. I think, but when people hear addiction, they definitely think of like hard, illegal substances, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. That's what I find anyway through conversations.
Like going back to literally what we just talked about a few minutes ago. Like people don't think about shopping. People don't think about exercise. People don't think about eating, like food. Like people don't think about those things as being an addiction.
But wow, it sure can be.
But wow, it is.
Well, I mean, let's face it, life is hard. And also, let's face it.
Life is hard. Good night, everyone.
Well, I feel like I could shut down after that sentence, but life really is hard. So I joke and say, pick your poison, but it just depends on what choices you have to make, like what you have to choose from. And yeah, let's just go right into the addiction thing before I get myself twisted. So I just wanted to come up with something that was just a basic kind of explanation about addictions. Yeah. So this is what I have. The word addiction refers to a condition in which individuals engage in the use of substances or a behavior for which the reward effects providing a compelling incentive to repeatedly pursue the behavior despite the detrimental consequences.
Mm-hmm. I like that.
I do too.
But can I tell you my one pet peeve with it?
Oh, well, absolutely. So just hold on. This term can apply to the habitual use of drugs or alcohol as well as behavior such as gambling, gaming, and other activities that become compulsive. I just wanted to finish that off. But yes,
sorry,
please
I thought you were
do it.
done.
No.
I didn't want you to rush through it.
I never know what
I
I'm
liked
doing.
parts of that.
Yeah?
I liked most of it. There was like two things that I...
Lay it on me, sister.
So, and this isn't me like criticizing. I don't want to come.
Not offended.
So, I really liked how it did highlight the behavioral aspects, like the gambling and things like that. I think this is only because I found a Gabor Mate quote on addiction so long ago.
Let's hear Gabor's.
So
state it, girl.
Let me pull it up. Hold on. I'll read it and then explain to you why I like this quote.
Sure.
So he says basically the same thing. Like he doesn't say anything different. He says the exact same thing. He says addiction is manifested in any behavior that a person craves, finds temporary relief or pleasure in, but they suffer negative consequences as a result of, and they have difficulty giving it up.
Yeah.
The reason I like that quote is because it doesn't specifically say substances in it. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
I find And I think this is, again, it goes back to like that kind of mindset that when people think of an addiction, they think of substances. And even when you look at a quote online to find out what an addiction is, it says addiction is a substance or.
That's fair.
Right?
That's
so
fair, yeah.
like, for some reason, they have to kind of emphasize that an addiction is, you know, related to substances or these other behavioral factors, but we have to highlight that it's for substances. But I think that with Gabor Mate's quote, it's more impactful, and it's more like it can be anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't stay in it, the word substances or anything substance related at all.
I agree.
Right? So it really shows that like an addiction is anything.
And really, it seriously is. I look back on my fitness fanatic stage, and it wasn't healthy to be up at 2:00 in the morning on an exercise bike.
No.
But that was my mental health at the time that was off the rocker. Shopping, you can lose your house with shopping, but if that's what you're, you know, some people get off on stealing because of the rush. I mean, yeah.
It literally, like,
I just love Gabor.
I mean, internet obviously is a big one that people talk. Sex.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Sex addiction is very interesting, I find.
I think it's more popular than what we realize, too.
I wouldn't say popular.
Well, okay, that's not the right word. It's more...
No, but I know what you mean.
Okay,
like that,
God.
like addiction to sex and porn, specifically like a porn addiction.
Yeah.
I personally find it, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but like just the psychological factors behind that.
Yeah.
I find very interesting to
I
like
agree.
look up on.
The brain is incredible.
Oh my God. It scares me, honestly.
Well, I don't think we have our full potential in action, so which could scare you. But just the science behind the brain and how trauma can make impressions on the brain, and different experiences in alcohol, not alcohol, addictions rather, and just how it changes the brain chemistry and stuff. All of that just blows my mind.
Do you know what's another addiction that people don't really think about?
What?
Hoarding. That one's very dangerous too. Do you ever watch that show on TLC?
She had 3 dead cats in her piles. Dead cats.
I couldn't watch it.
Well, that was the end of my watching it after the dead cats were found.
Was
it
called Hoarding? Is that what the episode was called? Hoarding Buried Alive or something like that?
It was something. It was so long ago. But I mean, that is another situation, because I mean, that's deeply embedded in trauma.
I have an issue with like those shows. Now that I think about it, like this is just like literally something that just came up. Like we were talking about it, and then I goes, I have an issue with this. That's what my head just told me.
You think they're being exploited?
I think they're exploiting people's mental illness, and because if you're hoarding, you're doing that. There's something going on there, right? There's same thing. Like they used to have that show Intervention.
Scared Straight, that one you mean, where they took young kids to jails?
Oh no, not that one. I mean, if you want to talk about a traumatic experience.
Yeah, really.
Let's scare a kid shitless. Like, come on.
Check that out.
But there was an episode, I don't know if it was on TLC, I don't think so, but it was just called Intervention, I think. And basically people just did interventions.
Is that where they kind of like gathered in the living room and these are the two? Oh, okay. Yeah. That's a long time ago.
It's like exploiting people when they're at their like they're very vulnerable.
Yeah.
So
I can understand why you'd see it in that perspective, because, it does kind of feel that way. But money talks and money sells. That's the sad part.
That's another addiction.
Yeah. It's another
what else
episode.
You got for me, Tanya?
Okay, so, I think 4 basic things are important to touch on: the compulsion, negative consequences, loss of control, and dependence. I think those are big, because even though you keep going shopping and there's nothing in your bank account, then there's the visa. The negative consequences really speaks out to me in some regard too.
Can you read them again? Sorry, it was dependency, negative consequences. What else was it?
Compulsion. So like a strong, uncontrollable urge.
The need to do it. Yeah.
Negative consequences. So continued involvement in behaviors or substances despite harmful effects that happen on health, relationship, finances, other aspects of life. And loss of control. I mean, nobody ever really wants to lose control, if you will. So to have something to control really makes sense that's part of a substance use.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. and then dependence, reliance on the substance or the behavior.
It's just, you're saying all these and all I'd be like, man, they're so connected. Like you have the need to do it. You're compelled to do it because you're so dependent on it, because you want that need. Like you feel so out of control in your life. Like it's just all so connected.
Absolutely. So intertwined. Understanding addiction as a complex, multifaceted condition helps in recognizing the challenges individuals face in overcoming it and the importance of comprehensive support and treatment.
Trauma-informed care.
Boo bam. That's right. We got this. So I'd say more about addiction, but I think that really wraps it up. And the fact that it's not necessarily I woke up today and decided that I was going to become a shopaholic.
No.
I mean, let's face it, you just don't get a compulsive feeling to all of a sudden just go shopping. You're not going to get an impulsive.
And I think if we were going to have a point, I think if there would be a point, it would be just to realize that everyone is addicted to something to some degree, right?
Absolutely.
Like even for those of us who drink caffeine, like
me.
Hi. Me. But we build a dependency on it.
Yeah.
Like we need to wake up in the morning. I'm talking about me and Tanya specifically. Like we wake up in the morning and we need to have our caffeine to make it through the day.
It's not right if it doesn't happen.
If we don't have it, I know for myself, like I get such a headache.
Me too.
Right. And I feel irritable and I feel like sometimes feel anxious and those are signs of a withdrawal.
Yeah.
Right? Not as extreme as like people who use substances and they go through a withdrawal, but those are the starting signs of a withdrawal.
Yeah.
Right? So, and that's when that's our body telling us, hey, that thing you've been giving us for so long.
Yeah.
Why'd you stop?
Well, yeah. And then your body's dependent on it.
Right? And then you're like, well, I have such a headache. I guess I need a coffee to make it go away. So you're going to go make yourself a coffee to make it go away.
Oh, yes.
Right? So you're just feeding into it.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm not that's not the right term. I don't drink a lot of coffee, but
no, I don't either. Not as much as some of our staff.
Yeah. Don't know who we're talking about.
We'll call him out tomorrow, next episode when he's on.
I don't know how his belly is still in his belly.
That's so if just to kind of bring it on a more approachable level, I guess.
Yeah.
For people who do drink coffee or caffeine and you feel that, you've experienced that before, imagine that amplified by like 10 or 20.
Yeah.
Right? Maybe even 100. I don't know. Because I've never personally been through that experience. But like, imagine that amplified. And then you kind of get a sense on why it's not so easy to stop.
You mean like when folks are dope sick?
Yeah, when people are dope sick and
Gotcha.
when people, they're going through withdrawal after they use substances. Like, and then you kind of get a sense of like, oh, I could kind of understand now why it's not so easy to just stop.
I mean, you really got to unpack it. I mean, if you're, I take somebody who has hurt their back and they start on opiates and then all of a sudden their body's gained a dependency on it that maybe they didn't know about. I'm sure you'd probably know about it in today's opioid crisis times, but I'm just saying. And then you yank it away. That's why doctors wean things down and then you wonder why people become addicted to opioids and I know the doctors are doing great things by helping out with pain. I'm not saying anything against the doctors, but you have a body. I've heard it from a client before that if they had known that it was so addictive, they never would have taken it in the first place, but they had a medical condition. So, I mean, these things can sneak up on you in various ways.
And doctors are doing great. I know that doctors nowadays are less likely to prescribe opiates and they're more, if it's not needed, they will heavily endorse Tylenol and Advil. But I mean, if you're interested in like how the pharmaceutical industry kind of profits on these things, I know there are some on Netflix, but I personally watched the Dope Sick show on Disney Plus.
Oh, how was it?
Oh my god, incredible! You know about the show?
No.
So it's about Oxy.
Okay.
And how, oh my god, I'm blanking on the name. What was the name of the pharmaceutical company that
Big Pharma.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Wow.
So, but it talks about how they, their big slogan was less than 1% will be addicted, and like how they were prescribing it to everyone, and like the lawsuit that came from that because they realized after how addicted it was, and doctors were like prescribing these to their clients not knowing that it was going to lead to an addiction. So it's very interesting, very, very interesting. And there are a couple that I have like on my to watch on Netflix about like the same thing, like the kind of like,
there's more shows there?
Yeah, there's tons of documentaries actually on Netflix about like the whole pharmaceuticals behind opiates and pain meds, and
that'd be
it's very interesting. So maybe we could pick one day and just talk about it. But
I would love to.
Yeah,
would love to. So, adverse childhood experiences. Yes. It's really mind-blowing. They've created this ACEs test that you can put, the kids can take it, not that they're filling it out themselves. I'm not saying that, but it just goes to show how trauma impacts a person. So what they are is it's potentially traumatic events that occur in the childhood. ACEs can involve violence, abuse, and growing up in a family with mental health or substance use problems. Toxic stress from ACEs can change brain development, which again, I love the science behind it and how the body reacts to stress. So once again, all interconnected. And the other thing that they've also said too is some chronic health conditions can come up. But the other thing is they can be prevented. That's the other big thing I don't think people realize too. If you get on board with preventing the ACEs, you can lower risk for conditions like depression, asthma, cancer, diabetes that will develop later on in adulthood. Just think about that. Stress.
So when you say prevent the ACEs,
meaning if you're aware of what ACEs are and you're having children.
Oh, okay.
So just like creating a better environment for a child to grow up in. It also reduces risky behavior like smoking and heavy drinking. So just the fact that something that happens when you're like 5 can affect you later on in life, it's quite interesting. So ACEs are also known to have a root cause of many mental illnesses. We were just talking about that as well. Chronic disorders resulting in trauma symptoms well into adulthood. People that scored on ACEs 4 or more were significantly at greater risk for many behavioral, physical, and mental health issues later on in life.
Really?
So they're already saying that about what children are experiencing when they're younger. Anyway, it blows my mind. I just wanted to let you know, too, that ACEs, when they're doing the test, it's about physical abuse, I can't even talk anymore, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, mental illness, substance addiction, imprisonment, witnessing abuse, and losing a parent to divorce, separation, or death. So when you take that whole gamut and you think about what a child... sometimes you can just be born and already have scored on the ACEs. So if the mother was addicted to substances, if initial abuse, things of that nature. So sometimes your risk goes up further. But it's interesting that the more stressful situations you have, not only does it increase your opportunity for mental illness and for substance use addiction, but it also really railroads your health.
Do you know what I find fascinating about this is like you said, like you could have someone who's not even born yet and already score on this test, which means then it's giving people the tools to, be like, okay, here's your score on this test. Here's your risk here's kind of where you're at on the risk scale. Let's learn right now before these symptoms even come up, coping mechanisms and how to deal with these stress and how to deal with this. I also, while you're reading it, you mentioned how kids do it. But I think too that this would be, if you have, say, if I was a counselor and Tanya, you came in to see me and you were like, I'm bringing up all these, here's my whole life story basically.
Right.
Then I can be like, let's do this ACE test with you to kind of see where you fall on this scale to kind of help you better understand why you ended up here.
Yeah.
Right? Do you know what I mean?
It's unpacking
it just kind of adds more of that kind of like validity
Yes.
to what people go through and
Yep.
why you are where you end up.
On that note, talking about ACEs and talking about like coping and like all this preventative measures, I found this is really important. What is the biggest predictor of addiction?
You're covering your phone so I don't see.
I am.
The biggest predictor.
Yeah, I'm actually.
Am I going to know this?
You may, but this is really interesting. So I'll let you know. So, age of first use is a major predictor.
Like from the person who
of
starts
addiction.
using?
Yeah. I don't know about you, but I've heard of people using when they're very young. Sometimes it's because a parent has
It's
encouraged
generational.
it.
Yeah.
So starting alcohol, nicotine, or other substance use at an early age is one of the strongest and most consistent predictors of an increased
That makes
risk
sense.
of addiction. That gave me goosebumps because I know some folks that have started really early, and I suspect that if they had an adult brain at the time, they never would have used. You don't know when you're little.
You don't. You don't know any better, right? And if
No.
you're, again, if we're talking about, you're raised in that environment, that's what you know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
And
your
there is
normal.
like, I don't believe black and white. I don't believe, that question, like nature versus nurture. I think they both impact, right? We're going back to the very start where we talked about how mental health it takes into account your biological factors, your psychological, and then also your societal factors. Like, I think it's very, it's not as black and white as like nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same with like when you're talking about substance use, like it's nature versus nurture. You can have someone who was raised by the most caring mother and the most caring family, but if they're still in that environment, it's still going to affect them, right? It's there, and your genes also, like everything. It's so complex, and everything we talked about today kind of just like it plays such a big factor.
It does. I mean, what happens if you have somebody that has a great home life, parents stayed together, got your white picket fence, and then all of a sudden some traumatic event happens out of nowhere? Okay, yeah, that sounds far-fetched, but let's talk about a natural disaster or a car accident.
But like, I remember when we were when I was going around doing those surveys. So a few months ago, I had to go around and interview clients who use. My God, a few months ago, I had to go around interviewing people who use substances around all of New Brunswick.
Yeah.
And I remember like one of the questions we had to ask was, how old were you when you first started using? And there was a nice few who were like 45, 50 when they started using. So imagine the repressed emotions and
That's interesting.
right? Like when I hear that, my brain, I can't help but think like, what is your life story? What did you go through that made you at 45 decide to start using? Right? Like it's what factors were at play? What traumatic event or events did you live through? Right? And we all know right now, like in this economy, like it's so easy to become homeless.
Yeah.
And that alone is a traumatic event.
It really is. Our community's having a hard, this country's having a hard go monetarily.
Right.
But then if you focus it down and down and down in just our small community, you'd be homeless the next day. I mean, you don't know if you're getting rent evicted. You don't know if you're going to lose your job. I'm not trying to say times are horrible, but there's some pretty pressing factors that make it hard.
There really are. And we didn't talk about it. I mean, we kind of did without saying it, but like the social determinants of health really play into substance use in general and how people can why people develop substance use, why people can't maintain sobriety if they're able to reach that point. Like it's very complicated. And you know what? I think that's like this whole episode, it feels like it's been all over the place. Like we've been jumping back and forth. And I think that just really shows how complex it is. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And we're not doctors. We're not psychiatrists. We're not here to diagnose anyone. But just understanding how everything's interwoven and relates to each other, and understanding and seeing how you don't need to even understand it, just know how complex it is.
Yeah.
And understand how complex all mental illness is, but especially substance use disorder, like how complex it is and what someone had to have lived through to make it that decision, right? Whether it's that's all they've known because that's the environment they were raised in, or something happened and at 45 years old they decided that's the only way they could cope.
If I could drive one point home, it would just be to realize that, I know I might beat this whole be kind to death, but you don't know what people have been through. You don't know what traumas they've been through, what experiences they've had. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know we don't deal with natural disasters left, right, and center, but let's face it, you look somewhere else in the world and
not
they've
always.
got that.
I remember, I'm from Newfoundland, and I remember like tropical storms and like hurricanes and right, like I've had friends and like people I know, like roads washed away and houses washed away. So it's not that far. It's not as far fetched, or like, you know, it's removed, it's not as removed as we think it is, right? Even when you look at like Cape Breton and stuff,
they get some pretty nasty goes, that's right. So, I suppose.
But it all that to say, like, just be kind.
People have been through a lot.
Yes.
I don't know how to drive that home anymore. Like, we're living in a world where there's so much goodness, but sometimes you got to fight real hard to find it. And we know a lot of things go on. We know there's lots of crime, lots of violence, lots of like partner abuse. I could go on. There's bad things out there, and our community has lived through a lot of things.
So I mean, I guess that's the point, I guess, is just be kind and understand that for people to get where they are, they've had to live through some pretty rough times.
Very much.
Whew.
Yeah.
What an episode.
I know. A little emotional at the end, because that's a big point that about this podcast that I wanted is to get the truth out there. Our community has suffered immensely. Yeah. So.
No, they have. So, and that's why we started this podcast. So.
Absolutely.
What an episode. We have our first guest coming next episode, and we are super excited.
It's going to be awesome.
He's our coworker.
Little does he know, we're talking about him right now. So.
Oh, man, what an episode. So
how do we sign off?
Thanks, everyone, for listening. We're recording this super exciting. When we're recording this is 1 week from the launch of the podcast. So we're super excited. We're hoping we really hope that people enjoy this. We really hope people are listening.
Anyone out there.
But thank you all so much for listening. If anyone has any questions, our email is in the description at adorpodcast@gmail.com. So that's ADOR. So ADOR podcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on our socials. Instagram is @doseofreality_podcast. And on TikTok, The Dose of Reality, because someone else stole a dose of reality. The Dose of Reality podcast, where we post fun behind the scenes clips and videos of the miscommunication that we have that goes on.
I mean, it's just about having good conversation about good facts, having a little fun, and getting truth out to the community, because that's it. Truth, the community needs to know. Yeah. And, of course, as we leave you today, be kind out there.
Oh my God, she has a catchphrase, everyone. It only took 3 episodes, and she has a catchphrase. Oh my God.
See, we did good.
You did do good. Good job, Tanya.
Thank you. Good job, Cassandra.
Oh my God. Good morning, puppy. And that's the end of the episode. The puppy is awake.